Now we're going to officially get started here for today's Monday Mini for episode 255, My Biggest Mistake. And for those of you who do not know me, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram. I am the founder and co-host of the World Builders Anvil podcast. And I hope you are all having a wonderful week. And for today's Mini, I wanted to talk about my biggest mistake. What was the biggest mistake I've made? So I think it would have been a good question. Episode 255 was from our Fantasy World Builders Undercroft group and questions they had for Michael and I. And the question I think should have been asked, but was not, was what was my biggest mistake in all of this? And there were lots of things, like waiting so long to get started. Maybe not. The technology today is a lot more accessible. So that might have actually been the correct thing to do, at least for the podcast. But in general, though, I think my biggest mistake was I had no plan to monetize from the beginning. And a lot of the longtime listeners might know that this, to me, started off as a hobby. And as starting off as a hobby, you're like, oh, I'm not worried if it ever makes any money. But the problem is you don't understand how much gear costs. You don't understand the cost of audio hosting builds up over time. The hosting for the website builds up over time. It's not crazy, and it's definitely manageable. But I think whenever you have an expensive hobby, you should always try and come up with some way to mitigate the cost at least, and maybe you love what you do and you would never leave your job to follow a hobby passion. But I think, what can you do to at least make it less expensive? And, for me, ultimately, I work full-time in our small business, which includes this brand. And we currently still have nothing to monetize it. So that would probably been my biggest mistake, is not having a strategy to monetize. And now you might hear us say, go to garduel.com/Amazon to do your Amazon shopping, which we'd really appreciate right now if you are in the holiday season. Before you go do your holiday shopping at Amazon, go ahead and go to garduel.com/Amazon. That would be pretty cool. But that's not really a plan. That's kind of just like throwing stuff up there and, praying that, someone, uses it. Kind of like, saying, well, if my show gets big enough, sponsors are going to hunt me down and try and sponsor episodes. And I don't know if I'm too hip on the idea of having episodes sponsored. If you want to challenge me on that, just offer me money to, sponsor an episode, and we'll see what happens. So, but, at this point, we've had around 200,000 downloads in probably somewhere around 80 countries. The stats have changed, so it's kind of hard to track that anymore. But I do know it's around 200,000 downloads. And I don't know how many people there were in those downloads, but I appreciate each and every one. But they were a chance to start a relationship with people. And that's actually the best part of doing this kind of work is, in the Undercroft and through the email newsletter, I get to build actual relationships with people. I've gotten really long emails, several pages long, of people just telling me about their world, which I find really cool. So, and the problem was always, because this was just a hobby and it was never really intended to do anything, I missed a lot of opportunities to build a lot more relationships, to maybe help people do a little bit better in their world building a little faster, because I didn't have the motivation. And a lot of people might think that, it's maybe greedy motivation, if I'm getting paid. But the thing is, it puts my skin into the game if I'm getting paid through the content, to make sure I'm reaching out to as many people and actually serving my customers. Because I always kind of believe that you need to have a win-win relationship whenever you're dealing with people. It's not about making the most money. It's about making the most money by serving people. And so I think it was a big mistake to not monetize it from the beginning, or at least have a plan. If I was starting over, I'd have something that within 30 or 90 days of the podcast launching would be available for sale, or maybe Patreon or some other strategy to try and monetize the podcast. So I do believe that was my biggest mistake in all of this. And because of that, I think I missed out on a lot of really cool relationships that I've built with people over time. I think is smaller than it would have been if I was paying more attention, because I was trying to make money out of it. So I think, if you're trying to do something as a hobby, even, you should always try and figure out a way to monetize it, because it will make you put your best face forward. You're forced to. So that would be my little advice to anyone out there who's trying to get started today. If you want to know more about the questions asked to us, it's episode 255 in the World Builders podcast. There'll be a link in the description below. And once again, this episode is brought to you by howtoworldbuild.com, which is my free project where I'm putting together a short curriculum for people on how to world build, the very basics, the nuts and bolts of world building. Because I think it's really very simple. And I think experienced world builders sometimes make it so complicated they get lost in the details. And some people are afraid to start because they don't realize that they were doing this as a young child. And at some point it was kind of probably beaten out of you. And hopefully not in a literal sense, but figuratively speaking. So it's a very cool thing. If you want to go to that right now, go to howtoworldbuild.com and sign up for the free course. Right now, it's a study building guide, and it's going to expand out to cover a few more of the basics and to kind of cover the general overall questions that you have. But right now, there's a city building guide sitting out there and a little bit more than that. So go ahead, go to howtoworldbuild.com and help support the show that way. That is absolutely free because world building doesn't really belong to anyone. But it should be accessible by everyone because it's great fun. So I hope you're all having a great day, and I will see you next time.